so we can
Great.
start.
So we can start? Okay,
Yeah.
excellent. Thank you.
So I'm going to welcome everybody. I'm going to just give a few rules and then Shoba will get us started. This session is live in YouTube and it's being recorded. Please mute if you're in WebEx and if you're not talking. If you're talking, it would be great if you use your video. You can, people in YouTube can sign in with a Google account and comment and leave questions in the chat function, and we will be monitoring it. And we have several hashtags and handles that you can use if you're going to use social media. So Shoba, over to you.
Great. Thanks, Diego. Good morning. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shobha Shetty. I'm the practice manager for food and agriculture in cover part of East Africa, Southern Africa, and Central Africa. The objective of the event today, this is about innovation challenges for agriculture and food security risks in Southern Africa. The objective is really to learn from the top innovators who are going to present their solutions to data constraints related to food security and agriculture risks. Very appropriate in this current environment, as you might note. This event is actually part of an advisory service program that the World Bank has with the Southern Africa region to improve the food security and agriculture risk financing framework. I have to note here, this is a collaboration between multiple global practices and teams within the World Bank Group, including agriculture, FCI, disaster risk management, water, IFC, social protection, and FCV. This event was really made possible due to a large number of partners from the region. And the slide should be coming up. The innovators that are here today with us have gone through a first selection round, and over the next 3 days will face a grand jury, or a Shark Tank approach, as we like to call it, that will select the 3 winners of the challenge. These innovators will actually begin their presentations today at 10 a.m. Washington, D.C. time. To get us started with the event, we will have a panel of experts. This is going to be chaired by Debbie Wetzel, the World Bank Regional Director for Africa and MENA, who will help us set the stage on the challenges and opportunities related to food security and agriculture risks in Southern Africa. So before I hand it over to Ede, I do want to recognize the team and the coaches who have really made this possible. You can see them on your screen there. So I'd like to give a shout out to Niels Holm Nielsen, Lead Disaster Risk Management Specialist, Martin Guria, Senior Innovation Specialist, Hilary Rizzo, Energy and Environmental Policy Specialist, Barry Marr, Senior Financial Sector Specialist, Christina Louise Zittel, Agriculture Development Specialist, Christina Stefan, Senior Risk Monitoring Specialist, Ekaterina Naimushina, PR and Marketing Consultant, and of course, our very own Diego Arias, Lead Agriculture Economist in the Africa region. So I will now hand over to Ede Ijas Vasquez, my boss, the Director for Sustainable Development in the Africa region of the World Bank. Ede, over to you.
Shoba, thank you very much, and let me do a sound check. Can you hear me well?
Yep, we can hear you. Go
Wonderful.
ahead. I'm going to put myself on mute.
Welcome, everybody. My name is Ed.
South Africa, we hear you well.
Wonderful. My name is Ede Ijas. I'm the Director for Sustainable Development for the Africa region at the World Bank, and I would like to welcome everybody who is connected through this Facebook event on behalf of the World Bank Group, and congratulate the participants who have been selected for this stage. I hope that no matter where you are in the world, you are safe, you are healthy, and your family and loved ones are going and surviving well through this crisis. The fact that you are here today reflects your innovative approaches, your motivation to try to improve the way we address agriculture and food security risk in the Africa region. This innovative spirit, this motivation, are something that the World Bank Group wants to harness to bring better and more integrated solutions to governments and to farmers in the Africa region. At this event, we have representatives of governments from the Southern Africa Development Community, including the Democratic Republic of Congo, Angola, Eswatini, and many more. It will be key to listen to their views on how these innovations could serve their government plans, their objectives for the agricultural sector of their countries. We also are very excited to have representatives from academia who play an important role in building the capacity of today's and tomorrow's entrepreneurs and innovators. We would like to thank very especially Draper University for their partnership and support all throughout. We are doing this work because we would like to improve the tools and the policies for managing risk related to food security and agriculture. This is particularly important for the ministries of agriculture, for the ministries of finance in the Africa region, to make better informed decisions. We are convinced that data and technology are key. So we hope to learn today from more than 20 innovators that are bringing very practical solutions that leverage data, no matter the challenges of availability or quality in Africa, to the most challenging development problems in the region. I think this is remarkable. Lots of creativity and energy are needed to find these solutions. Given the complexity of these challenges within the World Bank, we have assembled a range of experts from many different sectors, going from agriculture, finance, disaster risk management, innovation, to be able to work with these entrepreneurs and figure out what are the most practical solutions and how to bring them to scale. The region continues to rely mainly on ex-post and ad hoc emergency assistance for crises like the one we're living today. But research and evidence from every corner of the world shows that these emergency responses can at times be inefficient, slow, and expensive. And they cause a lot of losses of development gains, both at the macro and the micro level. For example, many countries of the region are being affected by a locust infestation as we speak, and it may get even worse in the months to come. How can we improve the probabilistic and the impact assessments of this crisis to help the ministers of agriculture and finance improve the financing to deal with such pests? El Niño drought, for example, of 2015-2016, cost the government of Eswatini 19% of its annual expenditure and total damages of more than 7% of its GDP. In the absence of any risk financing instruments, well, the government had to resort to a budget reallocation to respond, diverting funds from core investments. I'm sure that you would agree with me that there are better ways to be prepared for emergencies, and we believe that innovation, data, and technology can help governments and farmers get there. Finally, we would like to thank every one of you for working in this journey together with us. We are very excited that today we have representatives from governments, development partners, technical agencies, the private sector, NGOs, and universities together, thinking about these problems and finding solutions together. Thank you for this partnership. It's great to have you here with us. We believe that there are very important opportunities for hard work of entrepreneurs, universities, and NGOs in developing the solutions that will allow for better financing of agriculture and food security risks in the Africa region. Congratulations again to the selected candidates. This is a very important step. We really want to learn from you. We want to support you. We want to find opportunities to give you feedback and to allow you to grow at a scale to reach more farmers, to support more governance. I look forward to hearing the results from the grand jury and to follow up on the development and use of these innovations throughout Africa. Thank you, Shoba. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Eddie. I'd like to now hand over to Debbie Wetzel, who will be chairing the panel. And before I do that, just want to alert you that you can send in your questions through the chat, and Diego will be moderating, so he will be passing on your questions. So over to you, Debbie.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be here today with all of you all around the world to discuss food security and agricultural risks in Southern Africa. If ever there were a time for innovation, now is it. And so we are looking forward to hearing all of the ideas and insights and possibilities that your ideas will bring to the table. I'm the director for regional integration for the Africa region, so including North Africa and all the way down to Southern Africa. And for us, the work on agricultural value chains, on food security, on issues around how we can help both agriculture and the financing behind it work more effectively is incredibly important. So my job today is to be a bit of a border collie to shepherd the discussion. And how we will organize this is I'm briefly going to introduce the speakers, and then each speaker will have 5 minutes to say a few words, and then we'll open up for questions. And because we're in an interesting format, this will be the first time that I'm chairing a session. I have my little phone here, and it has a timer. And so when we hit 5 minutes, the timer's going to go off, and then I'll give you another minute to bring to a close wherever you are. And then I'll be very ruthless and mean after 6 minutes and tell you to, because we want to leave time for the questions that folks will send in from around the world. We have a great panel, and we would like to make sure that we're able to respond to your questions from different perspectives of the panel. Diego, could you bring up the speakers, the list of speakers, the presentation of speakers? So the next slide, please. So with us today, we have Marie-Françoise Marinelli, who is the country director for South Africa, Botswana, Namibia, Lesotho, and Eswatini. She has a very long and prestigious career in the bank. She's particularly effective at driving for solutions, working with clients on the ground in all sorts of different environments. She served in West Africa. She, prior to her current position, she was in the Maghreb. And so what I'd like to do, perhaps, if you could go back one slide, whoever's controlling the slides, just going to mention everybody and where they're from, and then you can bring up the individual slide as the people are speaking so folks can look at the details of their background. Holger Cray is a practice manager in the agricultural practice in the World Bank. He's very active at the moment and working with others to lead the way on the locust work that we're doing. Olivier Mahoul is also a manager at the bank working on disaster risk finance. That is an incredibly important part of how the World Bank has been approaching issues related to agriculture, to catastrophe, to coming up with new and innovative ideas such as catastrophe CAT DDOs, so budget support, insurance type mechanisms to deal with catastrophe financing. We have with us today as well Dr. Jerry Skees, who is the co-founder and chief strategy officer of Global Parametrics. And then finally, David Laborde, who is a senior research fellow at IFPRI. So I'll turn to MF to get us going, Marie-Françoise. And let me hand over to you, MF, and to kick us off.
Okay, thank you very much, Debbie, Ede, and Shoba, and good morning and good afternoon, participants, wherever you are. I'm absolutely delighted to participate in this panel, but I find extremely timely in the context of COVID-19. But more importantly, the notion of innovation, I want to mention that we are trying to establish a startup network for Southern Africa, and I'm hoping that the successful candidates here can help support that. Moving to the topic itself of food security and agriculture, needless to say that this is very important for Southern Africa for the point of view of both poverty reduction and economic growth. Only a few months ago in November, Lesotho, one of my 5 countries, declared a drought, emergency drought, and we had to come with an innovative solution to address that. So it's something that we are living with our clients. As a new country director for the region, I quickly saw, the importance of tackling a number of issues regionally, and David knows that, and not just country by country. And I particularly made a priority for this particular agenda of climate change resilience, but I use the opportunity to mention 2 others, jobs and human development. I think that, as all of you know, the risk to food insecurity and agriculture are price volatility, climate change, pests and diseases, and although these can be addressed at the country level, they are more effective if we can tackle them regionally, and I think that AD has already mentioned that. Just to highlight a couple of points, we know we've seen how closing border and export bans can affect food price and create spikes. Similarly, if we look at how the fall army worm shows how countries need to be together, and you also mentioned the locusts recently. So we need to see how to collectively work on that. And finally, the importance of monitoring weather patterns and forecasting the impact of the next El Nino can really be done more effectively at a regional level. So today, with this COVID-19 that is really tackling in our region, although in Lesotho we have not a declared case yet, but that doesn't mean that they are out of it. We see the importance that to ensure that food supply chains keep working, reduces the risk of logistic and trade disruptions that we can see, and particularly ensuring, because this is our motto, is ensure that the most vulnerable and the poor have access to sufficient and affordable food, price and quantity. So I want to maybe, Debbie, as you asked me to put this, to set the stage, to maybe point out a few elements, and I want to start with the first slides, if it can be put forward, to show the potential of an impact of climate change on poverty and extreme poverty in particular. So let us move to the next slide, please, and put it in the full format. Yes, so you can, no, the previous one, please. Yes, this one. So you can see the impact of climate change on food security and ultimately in poverty. If you look at the left-hand half, the Southern African region, you can see that Angola, for example, run the risk of having an increase in 10% in terms of poverty, and the others between 6 and 10%. And this is just to the impact on agriculture. So these are, of course, the worst scenario, but that really reinforces the need to look at that together. Moving to the next slide to show that not only this affects poverty reduction, but what is really coming out of this slide is that looking at a long period, the frequency of the El Nino events and the fact that they are more extreme. I know that Holger will speak more about that, but I just want to point, you can see that in the case of corn, you had a drop of 18% of the yield. This is quite significant, translated into almost 0.9 million metric tons less of corn. So this is not insignificant when we are talking of poverty reduction. So let us now move to the next slide. The idea is to say, how are we going to use these innovators, the young innovators, to see how they can come with solutions to address this issue of climate variability that we saw in the previous slide. The government has come out with a number of instruments, not only possibility to use the IDA, but also to use a contingent emergency response component that we actually have put in almost all our projects in our portfolio, because they can be triggered very quickly when there is an event. And I mentioned to you Lesotho, we considered using our CERT to help the government. And finally, we have this policy instrument that can include deferred drawdown options, what we call the CAT DDO usually, and they come handy when actually the problem arises and you don't have to go to the board, they are already in place. And I should mention that in that, still referring to our countries, we were in the process of preparing a DPL with a CAT DDO for Lesotho. So we try to optimize this instrument. Of course, a lot has to do with how they are used and implementing, how our task team are informed, and they can see how we work with the client to make sure that they are used and implemented efficiently. Now, let me move to my last slide because I want to stay within my 5 minutes.
Yep, you have 1 more minute. You hit
Okay,
5 minutes. I don't know if you heard the
essentially, what is very important is that let us start small. So, for example, in the case of Botswana, testing, the EU standards for the meat supply chain. Keep it simple, so picking 1 or 2 issues and use them. Work with the private sector. I think that the private sector brings solution, and this is what we will see. And finally, try to focus on public goods, ensure, for example, that the digital infrastructure is available, and looking at statistics and research. For example, maybe I will end with that, the idea of having a regional agro-meteorological bulletin in Southern Africa that could help country to monitor the weather together. So I think that we have a very nice agenda. We like to see how the youth are coming within this framework to bring us the best solutions. And I look forward to listening and participating in the panel and the following session. Thank you, Debbie.
Thanks very much, Emma. Great job. Very important to think about how we approach this. So this notion of start small, start simple, what we see in a lot of the work across the regional agenda is big initiatives, very large ones that oftentimes get launched, but then implementation is always a difficulty. And so we really look forward to the creative ideas of the innovators to tell us where they can find particular niches and focused efforts to help us get some traction. So now I'm going to turn to Dr. Jerry Skies, the co-founder, director, and chief strategy officer for Global Parametrics. A little bit on his background. He's built the first area yield insurance for the US in the 1990s, has a long career in a variety of areas on innovation with respect to agricultural risk. So Jerry, over to you, please. Are you there?
I have to take off mute.
Yep, there you go. We can hear you. Great, thanks so much.
And I'm going to try to share my PowerPoint if someone could release, and I will share us some slides. So it's very nice to be here, and congratulations to everyone participating in this challenge. I agree with all the things that have been said previously. Quite important. What's happening in the world now makes these efforts even more critically important. So I'm going to go through a few things about the company that I helped found called Global Parametrics. And the word parametrics is there because we do parametric risk transfer type products. Obviously, the connection between resilience, growth, poverty reduction, all of these things are very much motivated by development economics lens, if you will. We are supported with investors from DFID, the British government, and from the German side, the Insure Resilience Investment Fund. They're equity holders in our company. And we basically have an end-to-end solution process. We structure risk transfer products for a wide range of natural disasters. Obviously, many of those involve agriculture. We monitor, and that can include forecasting, and we organize the financing because we also have access to a GP natural disaster fund that has been provided to us by the British and German governments, and we have Hanover Re sitting beside that fund now. So we have a complete opportunity to provide solutions. Olivier's on with the panel with me. Obviously, the thought processes through the years of being a consultant with the World Bank and being involved with the index-based livestock insurance, which was one of the first examples of using contingent financing to protect against massive livestock losses. That whole idea of risk layering is also brought into the Global Parametrics philosophy. We work with a number of clients at what we call the meso level. We did our first transaction was with Vision Fund. This particular slide speaks to how we work with them. To get to a focus point of work we're doing now, we have a machine learning process now, and we're forecasting and modeling out what we call GP yield. And our focus point right now is in South Africa. We've done some work in Argentina on this as well. We will be able to use a modular approach with the climate data, including forecast data, to actually model out crop yields. Here's an example of Western Cape wheat yield over time against the state yield. It's a pretty elaborate process. We assemble a variety of climate data, both in terms of real-time data and forecast data. Within that context, we have history, so we can actually price, and we combine that with state-level yields. Now, we were a recipient of the World Bank Challenge that was organized last year, and I'm very happy that David is here with us from IFPRI, because we're working now on something we call forecast and financing for food security. And this includes our side, which is the supply shock, and then David with IFPRI is doing the price shock and the food insecurity impact. So we plan to bring that whole storyline together, and the focus is DRC and South Africa. DRC is more along the climate smart agriculture side of what the World Bank is involved with. Recently, an article came out that I would refer you to give you a little more perspective on how we think about using forecast-based financing. There's a little bit of history here. I was involved in Peru, where we designed what we think is the first world's forecast insurance product that used the signal from El Nino and would pay before the catastrophic flooding in the northern part of Peru. When you think about using insurance solutions like this, you really are turning the idea of insurance a bit on its side, if not on its head, because rather than paying for losses, you're paying potentially prevent losses. So this is a big part of a program that I'm trying to bring forward in Global Parametrics. We have activity with Oxfam. We've done a project with them on forecasting tropical cyclones in the Philippines. We've worked with Vision Fund to reinforce their balance sheet whenever there is a disaster. We're working with some agribusinesses in South Africa, and obviously with the work we're doing with the World Bank, we hope we'll be moving toward some government solutions as well. You know, from my perspective, putting the science and all the ideas that the innovators are presenting today together with actual financing mechanisms in the very spirit of the core programs that the World Bank has been moving forward for the last 25 years is very much aligned with what we plan to do with Global Parametrics. You'll have to excuse me, this is my protest against being isolated. I usually don't have this growth, but it's very nice to be here, and I hope that we can have a lively discussion. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Jerry. And I think this, as we think about insurance and these various tools that we have for responding to particular events, I guess one of the things in the current context, as we go forward with the COVID health crisis, but also the economic impact that may have, is when all the risks are triggered, how do we think about insurance? And so I think it'll be interesting to hear a little bit more about the prevention side of it. But I think most insurance mechanisms at the moment are suddenly going to be activated. So we look forward to hearing a little bit more about that. So next up is our own Holger Cray, agricultural practice manager here at the World Bank. So Holger, over to you.
Thank you very much, Debbie, and very good day to all of you, irrespective of from where you connect. If this was a tweet, I would most probably lead with the hashtag proud to partner. I'm deeply impressed by the creativity and the energy that the innovators bring to this 3 days event. I'm looking through the shortlisted candidates, and I think all of them are extremely relevant to what we do. We have already heard from Ede, from MF, from Debbie, about how we try to capture risks much more ex ante, upfront, upstream, and how we understand that it's not only a country by country approach, but it takes regional approaches to really capture the bigger risk confronting food security risks. In this context, I just want to make 3 points. They relate to partnerships, to policy, and how to bring a holistic approach to what we do around the risk exposure in agriculture. Let me start with partnerships. The SMF has alluded to, particularly in Southern Africa, in the past, extreme weather and extreme risk exposure would lead to dramatic impacts in food markets around every 12 years. If we now look at how much the system has accelerated due to a changing climate, dramatic impact happens every 2.5 years. So impact that really depresses agricultural markets, food availability. And against the backdrop of that, we understood a while ago that all the efforts to handle this agency by agency, partner by partner, were not good enough. So last year in August, the heads of a whole range of the big development partners came together in Kigali for what was labeled the Africa Food Security Leadership Dialogue. Those were literally the heads of institutions such as the World Bank, IFAD, AFDB, FAO, and all this under the chairmanship of the Commissioner of Agriculture of the African Union, Ambassador Sako. Why do I make this point in a session on risk exposure? Because very clearly, although this is a World Bank organized event today, I want to impress on all of us to address risk in partnership with these bigger bodies. The African Union Commission is a leader in this domain. Resilience is part of the CAADP Compact, so of the Comprehensive Africa Development Program on Agriculture. And so I encourage all the participants today from the outset to think in partnership structures, including also, and we heard about it, SADC. The second, policy. You will see that throughout these 3 days, we might quite often discuss the investments that are needed to improve risk capture or reduce risk exposure. And indeed, investments are needed. Investments in infrastructure, investments in IT, most importantly, investment in people. But let us jointly not forget that it also takes better policy in various domains. Let's take the COVID context. Countries resort at this point in time to trade barriers, international trade barriers, or even worse, domestic trade barriers, limiting the flow of agricultural inputs, agricultural outputs. And better information also on food corridors and on availability of amounts will prevent governments from taking irrational action, for instance, through their food reserve agencies. A second example, resilience. See, in principle, we all together have a pretty good or an increasing understanding of what it takes to become more climate resilient in agriculture. And it's not only investment, it's also subsidies, not providing incentives against resilience, preventing governments from inspiring just monoculturing that makes systems much more vulnerable to climate change. And the third, EDIAS alluded to it, locust, the crisis in a crisis. The dramatic crisis that's unfolding up north with $10 billion damage to livelihoods in the Horn of Africa. Wouldn't it be nice if we could use your innovative powers to also get us probability cones of future impact, just like in the case of hurricanes or typhoons? So these are all policy actions. And my last point on the holistic approach, you will see that in the discussions throughout these 3 days, and perhaps in the balance of the shortlisted enterprises, we are very crop-centric. Our focus is always on the grains, and it's on the maize, and it's on the soy. And I find it is about time to bring more attention to livestock. I'm not saying you neglect livestock. I'm not saying we neglect livestock, but think just about the COVID challenge. The challenge is also a zoonotic challenge. It is a challenge that happens at the interface of people and animals. And I feel particularly in the Southern African circuit, where livelihoods are quite often livestock-based livelihoods, I encourage all of us to think through whether as part of a regional risk thinking, we can more actively forefront also. Debbie, I hear your sound, and I'm actually done at this point.
No, you have one more minute. You've got 1 or 2 more minutes, just to be fair.
I only need that for my vote of thanks to all of you. I thank for the opportunity to speak on this panel, but believe I'm very, very proud to be partnering with this impressive group of innovators. So, and when I tweet again later in the day, I will be using hashtag proud to partner. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Holger. So we'll look for your proud to partner tweet, and of course, I couldn't agree more in terms of the importance of partnerships and navigating multiple partnerships. And so how we bring it all together in a way where partnerships are not working in different directions, but are aligned and effectively providing cohesive solutions. So let me now turn to David Laborde-Debouquet. He's a senior research fellow at IFPRI, and his research looks at globalization, trade, measurement and modeling of protectionism, multilateral regional trade liberalization, as well as environmental issues. In this moment of lockdown, I think issues around, as Holger alluded to, cross-country trade, but also domestic restrictions is incredibly important. And we're thinking actively about how we can help make sure that restrictions are not feeding into problems of food security as part of the current crisis. So David, over to you.
Thank you very much, and good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Yes, I will talk about some of these trade issues during the 5 minutes I have. And I just want to say that I am delighted to be part of this panel and to listen to the innovators today. Jerry has already talked a bit about what we are doing in some of the projects we have, but I will want to touch about the vision we had behind this project on 3 truths that we should never forget when we think about what we do and what we try to address. First, in order to deal with the food security challenge and also the poverty reduction that we have as a goal, as a global goal, we will need to invest in agriculture. And people doesn't like to invest in agriculture. It's a very risky business. And when you are actually a smallholder, you don't really have so many strategies to deal with this risk. So we need institution, we need innovation in order really to tackle this, in particular in the context of climate change, where we are going to need to invest even more, both in terms of thinking about adaptation and mitigation, and of course through climate smart agriculture practices. We don't need really to differentiate the two, but we have big challenges ahead in a world where initially already investing in agriculture was challenging. So how we can think about this is quite important. My second point is we are going to talk a lot about weather risk and production risk, but I think what was very clear with the current COVID crisis is you need to think about risk at the system level. You know, it's a value chain approach, what you do for your input, what you do for your output. And therefore, you have to think about how markets react and the economic implication of any, I will say, weather shock or pest and disease shock, really. Of course, we have a biophysical impact, but what matters at the end is the economic impact mitigated or at least mediated by different markets that actually operate very differently across the sub-region that we are talking about, you know. And we should not also oversimplify the story. This is why we need relatively complex tools to address this issue. I will also point that, you know, we talk about drought, we talk about all these negative events, but when you think about livelihood of people, we have seen also poverty increase when you have bumper crops because markets are not properly integrated. So really thinking about how this fluctuation of production is absorbed by the value chain. What it means in terms of prices, in economic opportunity, is quite important to have this inclusive approach and things at the different aspects of the distribution. My third point is really about, well, we see how these policymakers react when something bad happens. Because they are policymakers, they have to do something. And unfortunately, sometimes they do the wrong things. We have seen in so many cases the implementation, for example, of trade restriction or export restriction when a drought hit, or right now with the COVID-19, that actually is bad for the local producers because you are blocking grains in some regions that actually have already potentially too much grains, and so prices are low. So you are hurting your producers and you are creating damage for the neighboring countries. So you are basically eroding any hope of cooperation, when actually in order to manage risk, we need cooperation and coordination. And so the question is why these policymakers are doing the wrong things. We can come with different explanations, more or less good, but one that is clear that in many cases, it's costly to implement the first best policy. You need money to do, for example, what as economists we try to recommend, scaling up social safety net, but you need cash. So all you are going to start to try to beg to different international organizations or to countries to get this money, or you start to have products that will help you to have the money you need when you need it, and through hopefully a more optimal approach, also how you pull and manage risk at the global level. And this is what we try to do with Jerry and global parametrics, both in particular in DRC, but also in South Africa, is to keep in mind that the world is complex. That, of course, you have risks that come from the nature and something that people cannot actually control, at least on a day-to-day basis. But after, in order to understand the livelihood impact, you need to model economic markets, see how they are integrated or not, potentially how policymakers react or not, in order to have a nice mapping of risk with a price tag on a risk, and after using financial market to distribute this risk and allow countries, for example, with sovereign insurance product or partnership with strong institutional partners to find this. So that's the idea that we have. And as I've said, we implement it in partnership with the bank, in particular in DRC, where you have all the elements that actually you need to really think about this, because you have a vulnerable population initially based on history. You want to invest a lot of money to pull them out of poverty, but you don't want to risk this money without a proper risk management strategy. You have markets that are actually highly segmented, so market doesn't operate properly, and in some cases, it's easier to cross the border when you are in Kivu to go in Rwanda than to deliver your good in Kinshasa. And the country itself has a very complex geography in terms of agricultural zone and things like this. So you need a lot of detailed information. You need to mobilize as much data and modeling tool that you have in order to capture and describe this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, David. I think the points you raised, both about coordination and lack thereof, and this question of segmented markets, it's been a traditional issue for Africa, where agricultural markets and trading across countries happens, but is often sometimes limited, but we're seeing it even now. So in the US, the news yesterday was filled with stories of farmers plowing over their crops because they can't get the goods to market. And yet at the same time, the 20 million unemployed are lining up at food banks. And so this question of coordination to help us find optimal policy, or at least not the most suboptimal policy, is something that is a huge issue for us to deal with and requires lots of innovation. So now let me turn to Olivier Mahol. He is a practice manager in our team that works on disaster risk management. He's global lead and program manager. So we have lots of different types of quote unquote PMs in the bank. So he's the program manager. We've come a long way at the World Bank in disaster risk financing, setting up different windows and mechanisms, use of these CAT DDOs that a few of us have alluded to, where we are able to provide budget support that's contingent upon the triggering of a crisis. And I know that in Southern Africa, this was particularly important in the response to the Hurricane Ida last year. We've used it very effectively also in the Caribbean and a number of other places around the world. Olivier, over to you to bring us up to date.
DB. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. I'm now, by the way, the practice manager in the finance competitiveness innovation. Things are moving very fast.
Everything
so
moves. Okay. Sorry about that.
Very, very happy to be with you for two reasons. One is because the team I lead on crisis and disaster response does cover agriculture insurance. And also this topic is quite close to my heart. In fact, Jerry may recall that one of the very first missions I made in the bank more than 15 years ago was about this livestock index-based insurance project in Mongolia, which by many aspects was quite innovative in terms of using livestock mortality index and also the risk layering that Jerry was mentioning. Anyway, over the last 10-15 years that it was mentioned, the topic has evolved and the agricultural insurance sector has grown dramatically over the last 10-15 years. And since I wrote a book about 10 years ago with one of my colleagues, Charles Tutley, the insurance premium volume for the agricultural insurance sector has more than doubled. But unfortunately, as you may all know, this fraction is still very, very small in Southern Africa, where very few farmers or herders are using insurance solutions or risk transfer solutions to cover their risks and their potential losses. Let me maybe highlight three key challenges that are quite relevant for agricultural risk transfer or agriculture insurance solutions. And some of them have been already mentioned by the previous panelists. One is about the accuracy of insurance. You need good data and timely data in order to be able to indemnify the farmers. And again, Jerry Skis mentioned that using some new and innovative data solutions could help to some extent get a better sense of the potential losses. The second aspect is about the speed of insurance and the speed of payment. You mentioned maybe CADIDIOs, which is quite a very, very a quick instrument to be used, being able to disburse in a few days. Unfortunately, very few market-based solutions can really disburse within days. So there is a lot of work to make sure that those payouts can quickly be transferred to the potential beneficiaries, in that case, the insured beneficiaries, in a very short period of time, and technology can help. And the third, I would say, challenge agricultural insurance and agricultural risk transfer solutions are facing is about the cost. How can make it affordable? Doesn't mean that the solutions should be cheap, because sometimes we tend to make confusion between cheap solutions and cheap coverage. And of course, you want to come up with something which is still relevant and but still affordable for the farmers and for the herders. So how can we make sure that the largest possible share of the premium is used to pay claims instead of being used to pay operating costs or even to pay claim settlements? So there are a lot of innovations that have been developed over the last few years, and some of our panelists here have been involved in that, trying again to improve the accuracy of insurance, the speed of insurance, and the cost of insurance. And as I said, maybe some new technological development can be useful. We can mention the Earth observation technology. For example, in my team, we have developed a partnership with the European Space Agency, trying to leverage their massive amount of data, real-time data, in fact, to find alternative solutions, to be coupled with ground data, because satellite data itself may not be the right or the only solution. We could also think of artificial intelligence, and more this kind of technology is being used to improve agronomic models, to improve meteorological models, and in fact now to underwrite market-based insurance solutions. And the third one is about blockchain technology. That again can be used to some extent to cut some of the expenses related to the operational cost of insurance, data collection, premium payment, claim settlement, all these kind of tasks that have to be covered somewhere, and to some extent can also increase ultimately the premium. But as we discussed, the technology alone cannot fix all those challenges, and the need for a proper public-private partnership between the private sector and the government is quite important. Goes back to this concept of partnership that also was discussed. So overall, there is a lot to be done, and I really believe that the Africa region and Southern Africa particularly can benefit from that. Just to give you a few examples, in our case, in our GP, we've been working with the other GPs in Lesotho, in South Africa, in Eswatini, and even now developing a new initiative on the Horn of Africa for livestock insurance. So there is a lot to be learned from projects around the world, and of course to be adapted in the context of, I would say, in a difficult context of Africa. Let me maybe just close by a couple of comments in the time of COVID-19, which I think make this specific event and the overall topic even more relevant. Farmers, herders, and governments will be even more vulnerable to disasters because they are first to deal with the COVID-19 situation. But regardless of that, disasters will still occur, and we expect, I understand, based on some forecasts, the next drought season to be quite severe, following in fact the past dry season. So again, this high level of vulnerability will in fact increase the need for proper financial preparedness, which does include some risk transfer and insurance solutions. And last but not least, about financial inclusion. Access to credit is critical. It's even more critical when in the time of COVID-19, when banks and financial institutions can be even more reluctant to make credits. So any kind of solutions to de-risk those agricultural investments would be, I think, quite important to enhance the credit worthiness of the farmers and then to give them access to credit. So overall, I think it's an extremely timely event. Technology can do a lot. Experience all over the world, I think, would be quite relevant in the context of Africa, which of course faces its own challenges. But I do believe that the right combination of, I would say, operational, financial, technical, and political solutions will help farmers and herders be better protected against disasters. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Olivier. So very interesting points with respect to what tools are possible. I think we're particularly focused on innovation. So this question of how we can use technology has been really high on the radar screen, and we look forward to hearing of the potential innovations that candidates and those who are going to be presenting to the jury may present to us. We've had a lot of questions, so behind the scenes, the team has been pulling questions together and delivering them to me. We have about 25 minutes left before we break. And so what I'm going to do is, normally I would, as a chair, I'd try to sort of induce a conversation amongst the panelists, but I think that's going to be a little bit hard in this format. So what I'll do is I'm going to turn to each panelist with a set of questions. I'm going to kick off with Marie-Françoise. And for each panelist, first I'd like you to just say a brief word about what you think the low-hanging fruit is in Southern Africa for agricultural food security and addressing risks. What are things that are really ripe for action at the moment? And then I'm going to set up some different questions based on your comments. So for MF, in addition to speaking to the low-hanging fruit, what do you think is the main limitation for acting effectively in the Southern Africa region? We don't see much in the way in the use of cat DDOs, or do we think we're going to be seeing more of those? And what do you think the impact of COVID-19 is going to be on food pricing, food shortages, those type of things? So a bit on the low-hanging fruit, and then a bit on what you see as some of the constraints might be. So MF, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that in terms of the low-hanging fruit, the good thing is that the countries have been thinking of that. I think that, as Olga mentioned, we see that each of the country has started to think of how to monitor the weather, how to put insurance. For example, South Africa, since it was mentioned several times, has done a very important study on agricultural insurance. In fact, this coming Thursday, we have a discussion with them to see how we can feature that and bring that to scale in the context of the new CPF that we are preparing. Secondly, I think that the other low-hanging fruit is that the fact that, in fact, this subset of countries is already part of a market, a common market with the SACO region, and they are quite well organized in terms of the linkages, the transport linkages. And actually, most of them are actually serving the South Africa market, and South Africa is also servicing this market. So I think that if we could think through, first of all, in terms of the platform, to see, and I'm happy that Olga is there, because I was not long ago in Lesotho, and they are in the horticulture, production, and I found out that actually their production comes a little bit before the South African production. So if we can think of the market like that and see how to position the country so that in terms of the sort of crops, we use that as a way to sequence them and to facilitate the exchanges. Secondly, I'm glad that Olga mentioned that we should not look at just as crop. Namibia has a good potential on the meat market. I was in Namibia in October discussing with the Minister of Finance, and he was telling me, we should not be just a market for South Africa. We should be able to produce something. So I think that in the livestock, how do we organize, the technicality so that these countries can structure themselves and work together. I think that there is maybe one good thing in this COVID is that now people are thinking more strategically. We were discussing a possible CAT-DDO in Lesotho because, as Olga mentioned, the frequency of this drought, is increasing, and the death. In fact, you may recall that during the annual meetings, the governor of the Central Bank of Namibia, when we had the meeting, said that in his entire life, this was the worst drought that he had experienced. He has now become the Minister of Finance 3 weeks ago. So I think that they understand our instrument a little bit better. And I would like to see with Olivier how maybe we can organize session when we bring together these ministers of finance, or at least their representatives, and also the private sector. I think that one key point that I mentioned earlier is that how do we come with innovative solutions? Just to maybe not to be too long and give another example. When I went to Lesotho, one of our projects that produces horticulture, and the question was, how do we prevent frost, from basically spoiling the entire production? And the fact is that how do they have information? And there was this extension service officer from private sector from South Africa saying, we learned that from our parents, that when we know that frost is coming, we have a way to put water so that, the difference in temperature is reduced, and hence you can really prevent an entire production to be spoiled. The Minister of Finance of South Africa was explaining to me how he has lost his production several times. So basically, Debbie and colleagues, I think that one, we can organize, presentation of the instrument together. Secondly, it's not only the information, and I was in SADC, as I mentioned to you not long ago, where the secretary said, if there is one thing that you can help us.
Okay, MF seems to have dropped. Are others there?
We are here, Debbie.
Okay, so I think her internet must have gone down, or the bandwidth, something occurred. So when she comes back, we'll give her a minute to close out. Let me, I think actually just to close on the thought that she was talking about, this question of how we can engage with SADC and the partners to look at the different instrument and the tools. What I find is such a varying degree of knowledge and sophistication in agriculture across the continent. And so the question is, how can we also help Southern Africa, which is in some places much more sophisticated? How can they further advance their sophistication in managing risk and in managing food security issues, share that with the rest of the continent, but perhaps learn from others as well. So Holger, I'm going to turn to you now. And a big picture question, which comes from one of our colleagues in the chat, is are there lessons that we can learn from South America? Some of us have spent some time working in the other southern cone. I worked a little bit further north in Brazil, which is a big agricultural country. And they have approaches and plantings and all sorts of different things. And so it would be interesting to hear a little bit about the extent to which technologies that exist in South America may be relevant to contributing to knowledge on food security and risks in Africa. And then perhaps you could say a word about this question of how we're thinking about the question of whether the changes in climate change can help us or are promoting new thinking in the Southern Cone about different types of crops and different types of innovations that might help diversify risk for the agricultural sector. Why don't we start with that? And again, you have about 5 minutes, okay?
I thank you for that, Debbie. And see, let me perhaps connect that question of, are there new ways of thinking coming up with that bigger picture question that you challenged all of us to, namely, what areas are ripe? And when do we now see a real take-up of ideas? And I would want to highlight two. The first one I want to highlight, particularly in the risk innovation event, is the one of how do individual nations deal with the risk, the climate risk and the weather risk and its impact on the availability of food to its national citizens. In the past, the individual state approach has quite often been to, among others, run a food reserve agency, into which you buy quantities, and then once the going gets rough, you release quantities to the more vulnerable population. And that might have been a feasible approach when crises happened every 12 years and when they usually impacted like one country or two. But what we see now is constant regional impact. So we do need different ways for these agencies or for these nations to work with each other. And I now see a realization that we do need, let me call it, solidarity mechanisms across these countries. Let me make up a case. It's not completely fetched out of the air, but let's say country A faces a food shortage and country B, the neighboring country, then says, oh my God, we have a neighbor with food shortage. Let us immediately, A, close our borders to country A to not release maize from our market to the neighbors. And we will use our food reserve agency to actively buy quantities from an already scarce market. What does that lead to? It leads to a spiraling of prices, even to higher levels. So countries working with each other on solidarity protocols between the food reserve agencies, using modern data and innovation that creates transparency what is available in markets can be a very helpful approach. And I do see willingness in the individual countries, and I do see a reg such as SADC as the ideal vehicle. That definitely, Debbie, is an idea that's right for prime time. And as the World Bank moves to its new funding cycle, so-called IDA 19, we now have much more the opportunity to also support this development policy dialogue on a regional level, and not just country by country. The other one, and I connect immediately to your question, what can we learn from South America, is the area of horticulture and livestock. I drove home my livestock point earlier, and I'm not a livestock person per se, but what I have been concerned about from the very beginning is that if we only focus on one or two crops, this is not good for the natural environment, it's not good for soil health, and most importantly, it's not good for dietary diversity of people. Kids that grow up on a diet that's maize in the morning, maize for lunch, and maize for dinner, if there are 3 meals a day, are stunted. I mean, not only in terms of height, but cognitively, just because of lack in dietary diversity. So adding horticultural concepts to the mix, either for export or just for domestic purposes, extremely useful, and also reducing risk exposure. Because see, if the maize doesn't perform, perhaps the lettuce does, or perhaps the beans do. And then livestock, not only as a source of income, not only as a capital investment, but livestock also as a provider of fertilizer and of protein and diet, and for the Botswanas, the Namibias of this world, as a source of export revenue, tremendously important. What do we learn from South America? Let me just cross the Atlantic on this within the same hemisphere, and I will be landing. Where will I be landing? For instance, in Uruguay. Uruguay is this little country neatly tucked away between Argentina and Brazil. And what Uruguay has been doing in the past 10, 15 years is it has taken all its little agricultural support envelope, that little bit of budget that they had, and they said, we will only provide subsidies or support for two purposes. One is if it enhances quality, B, if it enhances resilience. And so the livestock herders, for instance, have only gotten a state support if one of these two conditions were met. Where Uruguay has propelled itself within these 15 years is to become a world market leader in red meats. And that is why it is because of a very, very focused public policy approach. It is because also it has been taking advantage of modern data tools, such as traceability, such as agricultural information systems. Now, I do not say that Malawi will be Uruguay. I don't say that Botswana will be Uruguay, but it is about abstracting and taking some of the principles. What I will be doing in closing my intervention here in that chat window, because I think his name was Ricardo, if I don't, yes, Ricardo Negri asked this question on maize experiments, and I don't want to go into maize experiments, but what I am posting here at this very point in time is a URL, so an internet address that links to a very recent World Bank publication on the impact of productive diversification, so more than just monoculturing, on nutrition and resilience. If you download that ebook, you will find it most probably hugely informative. And if you have further questions, just be in touch with me.
Great. Thank you so much, Holger. And in a prior part of my career, I was a country director for Brazil, and we worked very extensively with Embrapa to reach out to African countries to think about how we could take the lessons from, Brazil has really, although it's concentrated in soy and beef, it does have quite an extensive agricultural subsystem. And so thinking about how we might connect the continents, I think there are very interesting lessons to learn from that. And thanks for your other ideas. So now I'm going to go to Jerry, and the nature of the questions has switched a little bit. So to get into the sort of details of the modeling of risk and some of the specifics of that. But so Jerry, in addition to talking about what you see as the low-hanging fruit for the Southern Africa region in the work that you do, there's a few specific questions. So one is about how the model of global parametrics differs from that of ARC, and maybe you could tell the uninitiated like myself what ARC is. There's a question about what the insurable interest of the insurance would be, what it is, what it pays before the disaster, and then some specifics about the relationship between weather and food prices in the countries where you're working. So really some digging into the models of global parametrics to get some information about that. So Jerry, over to you. You can pick and choose from those as you wish. About 5 minutes, okay?
Okay, thank you. Please keep the time on for me. So I want to start with the low-hanging fruit. I don't know. I mean, this has been my career trying to find the low-hanging
Great.
And you know what? One thing that sprinkled through my career was working with U.S. crop insurance and seeing the subsidies and trying to understand what the implications of subsidizing people to take more risk, and creating more monoculture, and thinking deeper as a policy economist about what that really meant, and moving from that into the world and being, with the World Bank, one of the first people out there promoting farm level weather-based index insurance. And I realized it was going to take forever. I wasn't going to live that long to really see this through, short of subsidies. And that's, Olivier mentioned that we've had agricultural insurance has doubled. Is a lot of that subsidies. And we need to think really deep and hard about what the implications of that are. So I'll put that to the side for a moment and then come to, the progression of my thoughts were to really build products for those who support the smallholders, as I said in my presentation. And I still believe that becomes the starting point, because the technology that you use in order to provide a proper solution for a financial institution, the agribusiness, humanitarian organization, that same technology can be then used in due course for smallholders. So there's a progression of things in terms of the way we built global parametrics to really address that missing middle. You know, we had a lot of work being done by the World Bank at the government level. We had a lot of people working at household level, but we didn't see a lot of activity in that meso level. So I still believe that is potentially the low-hanging fruit. Now, ARC, very happy to see our ARC progressing. I mean, with the World Bank in 2002, I was kicking around with several people about these kind of ideas, and we went to Rome, and ARC does things different than we're doing.
Can you specify what ARC is for those of us?
Thank you.
What does ARC stand for, please?
The African Risk Capacity, a very innovative
Thanks.
union. It's the African Union organization, and it involves mainly products that deal with drought conditions and trying to finance those with a pool of risk, and in a lot of the spirit of the Caribbean facility that was done to pool natural disaster risk across the island states. So the African Risk Capacity does things very differently than what we do in terms of modeling. And in particular, if we can make progress with IFPRI, because we're also trying to take it to full scale, you know, not only the shock, the weather shock, which we model in a very different way because we're looking at even putting forecast information in and actually modeling crop yield. If we can move that into the price shock, and by the way, you know, very important point that David mentioned, we can also model bumper crop yields, and you could put a product together that would be basically a swap between the really good years and the bad years for a lot of these structures that we're involved in, and you would take care of some of the problems from the social side that are created whenever there is a bumper crop. So that's some of it. Insurable interest. Oh my goodness. Listen. The insurable interest here are as any entity that is going to absolutely have a business interruption when there is a forecast. Even if the forecast is wrong, you're going to have business interruption because people are preparing. You know, we spent a lot of time, Richard Carpenter, who I work with all over the world, legal and regulatory advisor, we did a Gates paper on how do you properly put weather index insurance and index insurance into a regulatory format. We work with Basel on this. So we've been around this for quite a while. The insurable interest is about business interruption that occurs here. Let's see. There was one last
question on weather and food prices.
Yeah, the food prices, and that's where I guess I'm going to let David pick that one up, because you know his cross-border trade models and actually getting our view of what the shock is going to be. And by the way, we bring that shock in production right down to the administrative level too. That's our focus. That's the county. We organize everything so that we can focus geographically. So David will take that information and run it through his modeling process, actually get that food price distribution with cross-border trade, what's happening within the country, et cetera.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So David, over to you, a few questions. So the low-hanging fruit question, of course, but then, and you can pick up on Jerry's point on the price, the relationship between weather and food prices, but a couple other questions that have come up for you relate to the question of food security and conflict. So we know around the continent there's a substantial issue of conflict. You mentioned you're working in DRC, so that's a bit of an issue there. We have it across the Sahel. We have it in the Horn of Africa, a little bit less in some parts of Southern Africa. But maybe you could say a word about your modeling on that. And then do you have any, in the models that you're working on, can you say anything about the link between the food crisis as a result of COVID-19? What's your latest on that? So David, over to you for 5 minutes, please.
Thanks. And yes, I will start by following up on Jerry's point. And on one hand, thanks to the work done by Jerry and his team, we can really capture how geographically the shock or the weather shock can be really specific. But beyond this layer of very fine analysis and at the grid level, you have to overlap with how market operates. And actually, what we see, especially in a country like DRC, that we have already barriers to intra-country trade. Basically, some regions are trading with each other and some regions are not trading to each other. That actually leads to this problematic pattern where for the same years, you will still see food deficit in some area where prices that will increase and food surplus in other area where prices will go down. But DRC is not cut from the rest of the world. And of course, there is different countries at the regional level or a globally level that trade with it. So this is what we try to capture, knowing that, yes, we have different level of trade barriers. Some are purely related to infrastructure, while some can be related to policies. And I think that what we were discussing before in terms of trade policies on one hand, but also what we see in the COVID-19, just movement, restriction of movement of people, we face new challenges. So this is what we try to capture, and we capture it based on how markets have evolved in the past. But because we use what we call a structural model, we can change this assumption. And that's going to help me to address the second question about conflict. Because the past of a country like DRC and how markets have operated in the past in a country like DRC has been heavily driven by their conflict history. So we cannot just, calibrate a model on the past and think that market will react in the same way in the future. We need to try to identify what is the structural aspect of this market integration or disintegration and what's happened in terms of conflict, in order that when we do this risk assessment and when we combine a weather shock, we can also look at alternative assumptions about what it means in terms of conflict, cross-border conflict, or internal conflict. So that's how you see conflict mainly as a way that disrupts how market operates and how trade linkages operate. But there is a second layer of how conflict impacts people. It displaces people. So on one end, you are creating a concentration of people that are looking to eat, and these people cannot work on their farm, not on their field, so you are displacing supply. So this is what also we try to capture. Just to be honest, we are still in the infant part of how we do conflict in models, but that's going to be actually relevant also to look at this COVID-19 crisis. You have people that cannot work on their farm, and I will come back to this in 1 minute. Just when we talk conflict, I would like to raise that maybe not so much for the southern part of the continent, but in East Africa, it's the case, and in other parts, we cannot actually disconnect it from livestock. Mm-hmm. We have these structural challenges between pastoralist ethnic group and practices that are actually heavily impacted by change in weather pattern, and that displays them, and in some cases leads to conflict with farmers. So, that's why also when we think about risk management, we can actually help addressing some root cause of conflicts we have seen. Because if you manage to find better economic outcome for both the pastoralists and the farmers, we can reduce some of this conflict that start based on economic tension and competition for scarce resources, in particular in terms of crisis. So yes, livestock is important, and for other reasons that have been addressed. Just on the COVID-19, so far, yes, at IFPRI, we are doing a lot of work with also models similar to what we use with Jerry. The two main drivers we see is, on one hand, the fact that actually, and it's not just in rural area, but also in urban centers, because people cannot work, they don't have income, and because they don't have income, they cannot buy food. So there is first this question really of how people can access to food by changing their livelihood. And we see some significant challenges, I will say, in Africa, because also the urban tissue in Africa is very informal. It's a lot of people-to-people services, low skills. So all the people involved in this business actually are economically threatened by what is happening. And of course, there is some risk of distortion along the value chain where trucks cannot enter and input. And I'm stopping here.
Okay, sorry, I was trying to. So I think just to pull a few threads out from what you've said, so we certainly see in the Horn of Africa and in the Sahel this interplay between the pastoralists and the farmers, and I guess what you find is this correlation of risks, the risk of conflict, the risk of climate change, the risk. All sorts of events that come together. And so thinking how you manage different sets of risks, each of which has subtly different drivers, some that are random, some that are not. And so that makes the thinking through these issues complex, but all the more important for us to be able to think holistically about how to address them. And I think on the bank side, we're certainly working very hard on thinking about this question of the impact of COVID on food security in urban areas, in rural areas, and how you manage between the two of them. And lots of active moments going on or thinking at the moment right now about how to address those situations. Okay, so Olivier, so in addition to low-hanging fruits, some interesting questions for you. So one is more generally about why agriculture insurance is not taking off in Southern Africa. And I guess a question on bigger picture incentives, which is really about the question of if we're going to be in a position of providing a lot of ex post emergency relief, whether in the form of in-kind stocks, such as those that WFP provides, or whether it's monetary in some form. What is the impact on that, on motivating governments to take insurance out? If they know that someone will come to the rescue at some point, how does that influence your thinking about where insurance will work and where it will not? So Olivier, over to you. You've got 5 minutes, and then we'll bring everything to a close.
Thanks, Debbie. Two very valid questions. On the first one, first of all, insurance, and Jerry could also comment on that one. Insurance by itself doesn't really work. Insurance is a mean. It's not the end of the story. And insurance will be there either to support access to credit, or eventually in terms of social insurance to support a specific population. So the question is more to see insurance as a tool again than as a mean. The second point I like to make is that when we talk about insurance, it's a lot about market segmentation, and the example was given on what's happening in South America. You know, when we focus on horticulture, on some high value crops. So the question is to be able to segment your markets, and when we focus on commercial insurance, commercial farmers, then maybe some specific financial insurance solutions could be made, like in South Africa for commercial farmers. So again, insurance stands to cover a lot, and it's important to some extent to segment what it means. So if you see like that, and particularly for agriculture insurance, mainly part of the broader financial inclusion agenda. And as I said, this is not the first thing that farmers will look for. They will look first for let's say for access to credit, and then again, insurance can be used to enhance, you know, the credit worthiness for farmers in order to access to credit. So there are a lot of preconditions in order to make insurance useful, not useful as such, but useful for the rest of the risk management strategy or the overall value chain in agriculture. Point number two I'd like to make, when we talk about insurance, I think it's important also to talk about insurance principles. And recently, as we may have seen, even for in some of the social protection schemes, this concept of scalable social protection, short responsive social protection schemes, where our SP colleagues are now building some sort of short responsive components into I would say more standard social protection schemes that can then scale up in case of a disaster, still using some of the kind of basic risk management and risk finance instruments, including of course access to data and making sure that you can plan in advance, so you're not you're better prepared when a disaster strikes, and then you can mobilize more funding and then channel more funding to a pre-identified set of beneficiaries. On your second point, I think it's all about financial preparedness, and I think what this COVID-19 situation will, I would say, unfortunately create is a for being better prepared for the next disaster. As I said, within the COVID-19 recovery phase, which will take months, if not years, of course, particularly in Africa, disaster will keep happening, whether it's drought, whether it's locust, whether it's flood. So the question for Ministers of Finance will be, how can I finance those future disasters when I'm already struggling to finance ongoing disaster related to COVID-19? So it's all about, I would say, data. And as mentioned by Jerry, new technology can be used to some extent to better inform the decision maker, not only for insurance solutions, but broadly speaking, to inform their financial decision. It's about financing, trying to mobilize early financing for early action. I think it's quite important. And again, Jerry was mentioning that in the case of Peru. It's also important to, beyond financing, to also plan in advance how the money will be used. And I can give you a couple of examples. So CADIDO is a fantastic instrument as budget support, but it's budget support. So how the money will be then mobilized and used by the government to some extent is at the discretion of the government. How can we create additional incentives for governments for not only plan to secure funding, but also plan on how the money will be used? And they identified ex ante some key sectors that will definitely need some specific funding in case of a disaster, whether it's for public services. So how can we make sure that we can restore and ensure, in fact, the continuity of public services? Can we mobilize some funding and making sure that those public services can be quickly restored when a disaster strikes? And we have multiple examples, even in middle-income countries, where sometimes, although the money may be made available, it's difficult for the line ministries to execute those funding. Likewise, for social protection, how can we make sure that these social protection schemes can be scaled up in case and plan funding in advance? So again, can we develop some sector-specific financial solutions on top of what the bank is currently offering with the broader budget support type of product? So I think there are room for further improvement. And as we all know, during this COVID-19 situation, the fiscal space will be even smaller. It's almost it's already quite small in many African countries. So how can we make it? Will be a lot about cost efficiency. And last but not least, of course, the role of to answer your last point in terms of ex post, it's a lot about discipline, not only discipline within governments, but also discipline within donors. How can we create the right incentives on donors, again, to plan in advance and to some extent help countries have this financing in advance and not just respond to ex post funding? There is, of course, a large political economic dimension. We all know that it's more politically sustainable, to come after the fact and to pay some funding. And in the US, agriculture insurance is a good example. But fundamentally, this is really to shift even among the donor community from ex post financing, ad hoc financing to more ex ante financial preparedness.
Okay, thank you so much, Olivier. So, for me, as I think about these issues in the conversation, all the problems that we deal with in regional integration are typically things that really don't recognize borders. So whether it's pandemics, whether it's climate change, whether it's conflict, we have a whole set of things that are affecting us that don't abide by administrative jurisdictions. And at the same time, most of our tools are things that are really focused, whether it's on segmented countries or segmented markets. We need to think about how to reconcile those things. Many, many risks to address. At the same time, you look at Southern Africa itself, and even more broadly, Africa as a continent. And the question is, how can we help the continent learn to feed itself and deal with some of those issues? How can we help bolster it in the face of these many risks that are affecting it at the moment? And there certainly are quite a few. So it remains for me just to thank the panelists. I think MF is back. So
we have time to say a word.
you have 1 minute, and I'm going to hold you tight to it because I have to be at a meeting at 10 a.m. So it's with my boss.
I know. I'm actually supposed to be at the same meeting, but I will skip it.
I need to be there. So anyway, go ahead.
So one quick point is, okay, 2 points. One is actually building on what you just said. I think that on data, on information, we can work with the SADC Secretariat to see how they share information, how do they put, this warning system. And the second one is that we need now to be very pragmatic, as I said at the beginning. I would propose that we take 1 or 2 value chains. We say that we are going to work on value chain. And let me give a concrete example. We've looked at the soya value chains, and we saw that South Africa is importing a good part of its soya beans from Argentina, when actually they could get it from Malawi for the other countries. But we saw that there were a number of barriers. So if we started to say, okay, let us look at this value chain and see, okay, what are the barriers? So we can go back to the Secretariat to say, this is why it's not working. And then we tackle the issue. So this point that I made at the beginning, let us keep very pragmatic. Let us pick 1 or 2 value chain. The meat value chain, Namibia is selling live animals to South Africa. They said we could transform it. So let us pick 1 on the livestock, and then we see how to unpack it in a very practical manner. Thank you.
Totally agree. I think that's a very effective way so we can work with the teams. I want to continue on and thank Jerry, Holger, David, Olivier, and also Diego and Christina and Shoba, the rest of the team who have helped to organize this very interesting, if somewhat unusual panel to kick off the Innovation Challenge. So we look forward to hearing from the different juries about the ideas that have been put forward. We hope you found this interesting as a kickoff to the Shark Tank. We're trying to be nicer these days, so I hope the sharks are gentle sharks in the tank itself. But wish all of those who are involved in the challenges the best of luck, and to thank everyone for their contribution. And with that, I'll hand back to Shoba. So Shoba, over to you.
Thank you very much, Debbie, and thank you for really masterfully chairing that panel discussion. Yeah, maybe we should do this more often. You seem like you were born to do this. I also like to thank all of our panelists. Marie-Françoise, it's great to see you again. Olivier, David, Holger, Jerry, thank you all for your excellent presentations. I hope I haven't missed out anyone on the panel. I think I just also wanted to thank all those who have connected. And please, you're welcome to stay tuned now for the actual Shark Tank session. Today's session will actually be on alternative measurements of weather variables, where we'll have 6 innovators making their pitches. These are from South Africa, Israel, Indonesia, and the US and India. So please do stay back. I think we have Diego who will take us through the rest of the agenda for today and the next couple of days. So again, thank you, Debbie, and thanks to all our panelists for this really marvelous discussion. So please stay tuned now for the Shark Tank, where you're going to hear from our exciting innovators. Diego, over to you.
Thank you, Shoba. Thank you, Debbie. So we're going to jump right into the Shark Tank. We will take breaks between candidates, so the judges and the people watching can also take breaks. The agenda is for the next 3 days. We will be starting today with the weather data challenge. Tomorrow we'll start at 9 a.m. With the animal and plant health challenge, and then on Thursday again at 9 a.m. we will do the agriculture statistics, agriculture data challenge. So now I would like to ask my colleague Martin, who will give us a little bit of background, and then we'll start with the Shark Tank to explain where this idea of doing innovation challenges for food security and agriculture in this region started. Martin, over to you.
Thank you, Diego. Pleasure to be here with such a great amount of entrepreneurs and great ideas. And the motivation basically is very clear. the agricultural sector faces increasing risk as natural disasters become more frequent and disruptive. Climate change is expected to intensify the following agricultural risk in the South African region. One, crop failures due to extreme weather events. Two, animal and or plant pests and diseases. And three, food price, agriculture, and trade flows disruptions. Notwithstanding taking into account what we're going through now of COVID-19, as we have heard in the panel. And the idea is to incentivize the development of these risk financing tools. The World Bank has launched 3 challenges with the aim to demonstrate alternative ways of collecting or monitoring critical data sets and indicate that can be used to ultimately assess in a granular, scalable, and dynamic way the various dimensions of impact induced by agriculture stressors. We have 3 challenges, and it's important to mention that these ideas, these challenges, came about from the challenge that we had in 2019, and the same participants that were involved in the challenges gave the ideas that came out to define those challenges. I'm gonna quickly go over those. The first challenge is alternative methods for measuring weather variables, and why? Well, data is essential. Weather data is essential for the development of risk finance mechanisms and other key tools to strengthen the financial resilience of farmers for climatic change. This includes measurements of excess rainfall and rainfall deficit, etc. And the goal is also clear: develop alternative ways to measure weather variables. Specific judging criteria, data sets resulting from alternative weather measurements that should be publicly shareable, and demonstrated consistency of alternative weather measurements technique over time. Go ahead, Diego, next challenge. Challenge 2. Predicting or monitoring animal and or plant pest disease outbreaks. Why? And how relevant is this with COVID-19? Pathogens are expanding in new areas never affected before, exacting significant economic cost on the agriculture and livestock sector. Prevention and early warning for rapid response are essential. And what's the goal? Provide alternative solutions to predict, monitor high-risk conditions of animals and/or plant pests or vector-borne diseases, integrating environmental determinants and epidemiological factors, such solutions would inform on risk mitigation measures, such as restrictions of movements or vaccination. And the specific judging criteria, the plant or animal pest or diseases in scope should be those relevant for the Southern African region, and such as vector-borne animal diseases and with seasonal patterns, such as Rift Valley fevers or January disease. Next slide, Diego. Bring your own agricultural data. Why? Objective, transparent, accessible, and accurate agricultural data is essential to develop high-quality and affordable risk financing instruments, such as insurance. With the expansion of novel agricultural data collection techniques, non-traditional methods can leapfrog traditional methods of agricultural data collection and expand the scope and availability of risk financing instruments to farmers. Basically, on this challenge, what we knew is we already know the data that we have from FAO, but what we were wondering is what data is out there that we do not know. And as we can see, is one of the challenges that has had more contributors. The goal is to present basically agricultural data time series for crops relevant to the Southern African region in an electronic format. And examples can be cooperatives, infra suppliers, etc. So we're looking for the best, most innovative and disruptive solutions. So when we began this challenge, on these challenges on March 2nd, we had quite a few number of participants, and we were able to reduce those proposals to 116. And then we went through the judging criteria, and we we finally got 20 shortlisted candidates. And after today, we will have 3 winners that will be decided in the next 3 days. It's also important to highlight, next slide, Diego, is that we're getting 116 proposals today. Last year, in the previous proposal, in the previous challenge, we got about 75 proposals. So we're increasing the number of proposals, and the quality is also doing a very good job. We're very proud. And we have had 16 for alternative methods for measuring weather variables, 42 for predicting or monitoring animal and plant pests disease outbreaks, and 58 to bring your own data agricultural, bring your own agricultural data. We're surprised with these numbers. In fact, we thought they might be, in fact, they would have been the other way around. But we're very excited. We are on. We got proposals from 33 different countries. A great deal of those came from India, from Nigeria, and from the Southern Africa. We got 47 proposals. A very good ratio. Diego, next proposal. Awards and recognitions. To present the panel of experts from top international institutions, we have been talking with all the candidates that are here today, all the finalists, and they know that they have judges and ready to ask them questions and enjoy that conversation. Exhibit also the winners of these challenges. All the winners will be included in a report that we are writing and that will be widely distributed. They will be featuring key media outlets as an innovators in the area. We will also be inviting them to Washington, D.C. for a ceremony, and they will have the opportunity to interact with all the different World Bank staff and different financiers and funders. And the top 3 candidates, very important, will also be invited to participate in the Summer Acceleration Program of Draper University, as well as the bootcamp of Innova and Draper. And Diego, I would like to go straight to the challenge, and go ahead.
Excellent. Thank you, Martin. So I'm going to introduce now the grand jury for today. And I would like to ask the first candidate to get ready. After I introduce the grand jury, we'll hear a short introduction from the founder of Draper University that will get us motivated for the first presentation. So we have 6 judges, and I will ask each of the judges, after I introduce you, to just open your microphone and say hello to make sure that you can hear us and that we can hear you. And then we'll start with the first pitch. So Asra, can you hear us? No. Okay, let me move to Claire. Claire, are you there?
Hi, yes. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone.
Thanks for joining, Claire. So Claire is the CEO and co-founder of Producers Direct. Producers Direct is an award-winning enterprise led by farmers for farmers, and they are one of last year's winners of the Innovation Challenge. So she was on the other side of the Shark Tank. Now she's a shark, and Producers Direct, they are experts in designing farmer-led solutions. So a lot of the innovators today will be really interesting to hear from Claire and what questions she has based on her experience. And Producers Direct, I encourage all of you to look at what they do. They have improved livelihoods for more than 1 million small-scale farmers across East Africa and Latin America since 2009. Nate, are you there? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I am. Hello.
Thanks for joining, Nate. Nate is senior climate change specialist with us at the World Bank. He worked mainly with the water global practice and helping mainstream climate change into World Bank water sector investments. And he's also responsible for resilience-related analytical products and other developments and advisory work with governments on climate change adaptation and drought policy and management. Thanks, Nate. Martin, are you there, Martin?
Morning, good afternoon. Yep.
Thanks for joining, Martin. Martin has been in the insurance industry for 38 years. He started as a loss adjuster in Winterthur, now AXA, and he's now with the IFC at the World Bank Group, where he's senior insurance officer responsible for Asian, European, and North African markets. So thanks, Martin, for joining. Eric, are you there?
Good morning, good afternoon here. Thank you.
Oh, we have two Erics. So I think that was Eric Fernandez. Eric is a lead specialist in the ag global and food global practice at the World Bank, and he heads the World Bank Group's Agriculture Observatory, which monitors agriculture relevant weather data and tries to look out for impacts of crops across the planet to guide policy responses. Eric Seyama, are you there? Okay, so Eric will be joining us. He's the Director of Research and Early Warning in the National Disaster Management Agency of the Kingdom of Eswatini, and he leads and oversees the research function of the organization, works closer with partners and stakeholders, achieving the multi-hazard early warning objectives. He's working right now on a drought monitor program for the country, and he also participated in last year's Innovation Challenge as a judge. So we're going to start with the Shark Tank now. Christina, can you play the short video from Mr. Draper, and we'll get started.
Hi, I'm Tim Draper. I'd like to thank the World Bank for putting on this amazing agritech competition. I think agritech is absolutely critical for the world, particularly today. We're experiencing this global crisis in so many ways. Having local agriculture, local food sources, it becomes more and more relevant to all of us. This is an exciting time and an interesting time when the world kind of gets a reset. And during this reset, you as entrepreneurs can set the course for the future. And I'm looking forward to seeing all the great things that are coming out of this agritech competition. Thank you, Marem. Thank you, World Bank. I'm sorry I'm not there to see them, but I will get a chance to look them over at my leisure. I wish you all the best. Go out there, make something really extraordinary happen. Do it with gusto and enthusiasm.
Great. That was Tim Draper, the founder of Draper University, is our partner in this year's Innovation Challenge, and they bring lots of value in terms of getting all the needed support for startups and entrepreneurs today. So let me hand over the microphone to our first candidate, and Mathis Marais is going to talk to us about their solution for this first challenge. And he comes from, he's a chief technical officer for Ingenie and the CEO of the South African company Incasu. So Mathis, if you can hear me, I will stop sharing my slide and I will hand it over to you, and you'll have 5 minutes of pitch, and then we'll go over to the questions and answers. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. just switch back. Here we go. Hi, I'm Matthijs Maré, and really thank you for this opportunity. To introduce our team within Gini, we've got Inkasu and NGR Solutions in South Africa, and AIR and Planet in the USA. Agri-insurance in Southern Africa is facing at least the following three challenges. The industry is largely underdeveloped. We estimate only 10% of coverage being under insurance. Then insurers traditionally target clients for financial gains rather than creating value for all. And consequently, computer systems involved in crop insurance also don't attempt to fill these gaps and actually provide value for all stakeholders. In our proposal, we want to make use of the Gini platform to catalyze both growth and adoption of agri-insurance in SADC. The first role player will be farmers in SADC. There are 17 different countries in SADC. Most of them have got internet and access then to social media. And social media is the premise of our proposal. Second role player is in Gini, our platform, which we currently use for crop insurance. We've got a management solution for crop insurance that we can adjust to fit this requirement with existing modules that we can add as part of the solution. The idea will be that farmers will contribute to the platform using their photos and messages and even form data on social media, as they normally would do, but this is more in an exact manner. And then using AI algorithms, we will be able to extract metrics and values from social media to be added to our data platform. We'll also be interested in adding additional input. That is where we will be using Earth images from Planet and then weather data from local providers. And in general, we'll be looking at condition metrics that will help in aiding us to get to weather information. We can even go as far as adding market information, if that would help the platform. On the platform itself, we want to use modeling from AIR to enrich our data, the data that we've got so far, and provide new insights into the data that we've got. We will be aggregating the data within the context of the farmer, the farm, land, crop, and the season. So that gives us a full data set coming in and data being saved and then used for other purposes. The third component will be collaboration with experts that we hope to bring in, using all of this data that we can then provide as expert advice on the same social platform back to the farmer, and also then helping them to collaborate with their peers. A commercial farmer might be able to help a subsistence farmer with problems over a long distance, where the subsistence farmers won't have any other help to solve the problem. A very crucial link in our value chain will be agricultural partners, insurers and governments that need to participate to make this work. With this data, they can use it for research to improve their products and also for governments to present new programs. But importantly, for incentives to the farmers, the insurers can actually use this to provide discounts on insurance, and governments can provide tax rebates to the farmers. The concept really unlocks value for farmers as we've got new collaboration abilities for the farmers. And also they might now have access to insurance products, which they didn't have before. But it also adds value to the insurers by enlarging their client pool and using this reliable and georeferenced data from the platform. But really the key of this concept is to incentivize crop insurers or agri-insurers in general to grow their book, which wasn't possible before, to reach more farming operations within SADC that will then incentivize farmers more to keep on contributing to the platform And in the end, governments will be able to use this to improve food security. And we believe we've got a solution that can work. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you, Mathis, and thanks for staying on time. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to call on the judges, and I will collect 2 or 3 questions at a time, Mathis. So if you want to write them down, and then you can answer all of them at once. So let me start. Claire, do you have any questions for Mathis?
Yes, thank you very much, Mathis. That was really helpful. So first question would be, in terms of the working prototype that you have specifically on the analysis of the weather insurance now, could you explain that a little bit more? And then a follow-up question. So one of the experiences we've had is that it's quite difficult to analyze quantitative data coming from social media, photos and things, and then distill that into formats that can be used for quantifiable information. And so just to understand better the AI capabilities of your platform and whether that's a challenge that you have faced and tackled. Thank you.
Thanks, Claire. Eric Seyama, can you hear us? Eric, are you there? Yes. Oh, he's muting and unmuting. So let's get back. Eric? Okay, Eric Fernandez, do you have any questions?
Thank you very much. Yes, a very interesting presentation. Thank you. What wasn't clear is how do you propose to scale this up across Southern Africa? So any insights there that would be quite interesting, whether you have any prototypes or prototype approaches, methodologies that you've tried with groups of countries, that would be good to hear about. The second one is, how are you proposing to share data? Is this what are the data sharing, data access arrangements that you have planned? Thank you very much.
Mathis, if you want to grab those first 2.
Let me just check if I'm on. Yes, I am. Claire, this is a concept for us at the moment. And both of your questions have to be tested. We haven't run any tests. What we have got is a platform that is being used by crop insurers, and we are actually presenting this as an expansion of the platform to be used for other purposes. So I understand that there's analysis that we still need to do, and also to actually interpret social media content. I think for us, the simple thing, and this really goes for any kind of metric that we'd like to pull in, is the interpretation of the photograph and messages could be very specific. When we say social media, we did not fix ourselves, or the concept did not fix itself to using Facebook or any other existing platform. In fact, we've already got a couple of tablet applications in the field for various reasons, for various purposes. And it could be a bit more precise in terms of apps running on phones, asking direct questions. And through that, we get better clarity and better quality information back. So in short, we haven't tested all of these concepts yet, but I'm sure that will be a next step if there's interest in this.
Thanks, Mathis.
There's 2 questions from Eric. Scaling across SADC. Eric, yes, that was part of the preparation that we did. Firstly, our solution is a software as a service solution, which means that given internet access, it should be available. The system should be available anywhere in the world. So it's not a load on a laptop or a PC. It's available anywhere. So the restrictions that we've got might be factors related to language that we need to apply new language packs to the system, and also insurers or reinsurers not being active in different areas, or even governments restricting us to go into that area. Our experience are obviously closer to South Africa, so it's We've gone up to Tanzania. We've got some experience in Tanzania. And all these factors will then decide which countries will we be able to scale to. The sharing of data, it all comes down to who's the owner of the data. Is this data going to be driven by an insurer or a reinsurer? And they need to decide how to share the data and for which purpose. It is actually one of our problems currently with insurers. And I've had discussions with a couple of them that it's difficult for them to let go of their data, to actually make it available. So if this is driven from another angle, we might be able to actually get data that's usable for other parties in the whole agri space as well.
Great, thanks. So the next round of questions, Eric Seyama's microphone is not working, so he put the question through the chat. And he would like to know, given that your team already has a good set of experts, how long would you be ready in rolling out this solution across the region? So that's the first question. I would like to ask Nate if he has a question. Nate?
Yeah, thank you, Diego, and thank you for the presentation. I just have two quick questions. The first is if you could describe, I know you said that the platform's already being used with crop insurers. If you could describe any achievements or successes you've had with it to date. And then in addition to that, I know that there are similar types of platforms on, at least in terms of impacts reporting in several of the Southern Africa countries. If there is any potential to integrate this, what is the opportunity for integrating with existing platforms? Thank you.
Thanks, Nate. Martin, do you want to come in with your questions?
Sure, absolutely. Matthijs was very interesting, very good. And I'm glad that people before me dealt with the technical aspects of artificial intelligence. That's not my generation. I am, as you might remember, I'm a lifelong insurance person. So my questions would revolve around that. You're basically saying that if there was better data there, that insurance companies would engage more deeply. I do question that to a certain extent. You also just said insurance companies are reluctant to share the data. They had 100 years time to accumulate that data and they failed and they never did it. And I don't think they're reluctant to share data per se. I'm not sure they have data. So how is your solution going to mobilize beyond the aggregation and accumulation of data? How is it going to really influence the banks, the financiers, as well as the insurance companies to start engaging in that space? And how would we, as the World Bank, more specifically the IFC, then engage, because we have the funding, we have the access to donors to make these things work, to lubricate the engine that finally the financing will be coming to the farmer. So that's the main question. The secondary question, and you'll take as much time as you have on this. Secondary question, how are we going to populate this amongst the farmers? I think this social experiment, as I see it, is fantastic, but it requires the farmers also to interact. Have you given any thought what the individual farmer would see as a benefit of posting information, not only himself, but also extracting information from the others that are participating? So these are my two questions.
Great. Matthijs, over to
you. Can we leave the achievements to date that Nate asked for a bit longer? I would like my friend Marius to answer on that. Potential to integrate, Nate. Obviously, we've got a standard API interface that is all the right words, rest and security and all those things as part of our platform. So integration to existing systems. We are at the moment looking at integrating with other parties, possibly in America or Canada, for an example. So that is let's call the API a work in progress, but the plans are there to actually get that in place within the next few months. I hope that is... Actually, I missed Eric's question, sorry. So Nate, that's the potential to integrate, and I'll ask Marius to answer the other one just now. Eric asked how long this will take. I think without the looking at the AI integration, our estimates are at the moment 6 months to go live or to actually get a pilot up and going. Obviously, within South Africa, we are here. We will be able to drive to those locations and meet with the people and actually start with the testing and with the use of the system. So that for now would answer that for me. Martin asked more data. Would that imply more integration? What we hope with this solution is that we're actually providing data that comes from a different set of the communities. A farmer has got a cell phone and he participates only on social media or through an app. And for us, that gives us an opportunity to actually enlarge the data set. You also said that insurance companies have been doing this for many years, and I'm sure my friends on the other sides of their lines are smiling because we've had a lot of discussions around this. Is why don't insurance companies get involved and get more, use more technology? We don't know. We sit on the technology side. We don't make those decisions. So interaction, I really think that providing social media or having social media as an input of data will greatly increase the data volumes that they could use. Last one, Martin asked about how do we populate this? How do we take this out and market it? Part of our plan and part of our costing at the moment would be for trainers to be trained, and actually the idea would be to put some feet on the ground and take them out to specific areas and let them arrange meetings. And obviously, this is driven by insurers and possibly by governments, which means there should be existing forums that we hope they could tie up with and actually start giving them training and support. So we don't have a better plan other than that for the moment. I think the incentives for insurers is the one that will be driving this, and then secondly for the farmers. Once the farmer will realize the value that they could get by contributing and having cheaper insurance and possibly some programs from the government, we hope that this will be a sustainable project that we can just keep on improving on. So, Marius, could you maybe answer the last one, achievements to date, if possible?
Yeah, I can try. Just achievements. It is a current working platform for crop insurance. We have clients in Southern Africa. We've got 3 clients in South Africa. We've got 2 clients in Zimbabwe, and we've got a client in Zambia. My other colleague was also have talks with various companies and governments when he was at a conference in Tanzania. So yeah, we all at the moment we are expanding. We're also talking to a few other insurers in South Africa. So yeah, we have customers or clients using the crop insurance platform as we stand at the moment, and it's a full end-to-end platform from capturing farmers' information all the way to doing payment of claims with all the assessment tools and applications or apps in between.
Mathis, anything else, or you're okay? Mathis, I think you're on mute. No, sorry. Okay, go ahead now. Yeah.
Okay. I think I've answered everything. Maybe you can help me if I missed something, but I don't know if the panel are happy with the answers.
No, that's fine. Let me see if anybody else from the panel wants to do a follow-up question. No? Okay, very good. So Mathis, I think you're all set. Again, congratulations for making it to this stage. You're welcome to stay and listen to the rest of the candidates. So let me now pass the word to the next candidate. We won't take a break now, but we will take a break after Oleg's session. So Oleg is CEO and co-founder of Carpe Diem Solutions from Israel. Oleg, you're connected. You can hear me?
Do you hear me?
Yes, perfect. Okay, Oleg, so I'm going to hand it over to you, and you can start sharing your screen whenever you would like.
Okay, so I share my screen, right? Just a second. Okay, so it works now. Okay, so should I start?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, thanks. Just to start with, I'd like to make a small disclosure that this presentation of the weather forecasting solution and the story I'm going to tell, it was not crafted specifically to the context of mitigating the agriculture risk only, but relates to broader aspects of eliminating hunger, poverty, devastation of infrastructure and human lives, which are typically caused by the adverse weather. And most weather-related disasters like floods, fires, droughts, they are common to Africa, and they can be eliminated using our early warning, early action system and technology. So as you may know, in January at Davos, climate action and extreme weather were the top discussed issues. And actually, this is a real risk to the value chain and a real threat to farming, food, shipping, mining, and to much more industry than most people even think. And if we look at the statistics, so the statistics of the previous year was really shocking. Last year was the 8th costliest year in terms of weather-related natural disasters, causing damages well surpassing $232 billion in general. And most of the adverse weather events can be well predicted in time with proper preventive measures taken, and acting quickly, we can reduce the losses up to 40%. So it's a purpose of our company where the weather service plays a really big role in people's lives, causing growing devastation every other year. And it's our greatest wish to respond to this climate emergency and extreme weather by providing a fundamental engineering level of our technology. Actually, the technology which helps to extract the most precise and sophisticated data about the weather, which can further be scaled into different data platforms and applications, providing the decision makers with the most advanced disaster prediction and management tools. Let's stop for a while at our leadership team. Actually, the company is being led by the experienced team of the technology and business leaders from billion-dollar companies and technology startups. I think this is a world-class team when it comes to building an impact-driven, sustainable organization. And frankly, it took us nearly 16 years to build our R&D team and to deliver this technology. Okay, so most existing weather systems are computationally very intensive, and the resulting forecast is based on 6+ hours old data. It's far from real time, it's lacking many meaningful data. And this is a huge problem. For instance, some disastrous meteorological formations evolve just during 7 to 10 minutes. They can bring hail, and it can really bring the destroying effects on crops and infrastructure. So where is the product and the innovation? Simply put, we have created a multi-purpose inter-period signal processing system, which works as an upgrade to the existing modern Doppler radars. It provides unseen levels of immediacy, precision, and abundance of actually the insights which are trying to get from the data. And it's based on a radical embedded innovation, the adaptive lattice filter. It gives us a huge advantage across 9 processing tasks, which are now poorly realized by ineffective methods of the modern radars or are not addressed at all. We can not only measure the exact parameters of meteorological phenomena, but also warrant its quality, protecting it from all kinds of noise and interference, and actually recognize the form of the spectrum of velocity, which adds this abundance of meaningful data for disaster prevention. As well, reduced computation burden means a significant drop in energy consumption, less powerful transmitters, and simple processing equipment, which means huge savings to the capex costs and better scaling. As well, the next milestone for us is to introduce the machine learning, which will help to instantaneously and automatically recognize the hazardous weather events, which will bring the solution to a fully fledged level. What's necessary to mention that this technology is advanced in its functionality, and it's highly demanded by many industries with heavy reliance on surveillance systems like aerospace, military, and marine. In practical applications, the solution is very easy to implement. It's based on a simple DSP platform, which plugs into a personal computer or a premise of a weather station, and should as well come as an inbuilt component of a new Doppler radar directly from a manufacturer. The market opportunity we think is great. So the Doppler radar market is only 10 billion worth by 2023. And actually, we want to make a quantum leap in the quality and the speed of insights for disaster prediction, warning, monitoring, and management by national agencies. They are actually the primary client. Furthermore, the solution has a great commercial potential to scale into other niche-specific applications within weather service and defense, transportation, and as well to industries with a heavy reliance on the data by becoming a weather data platform.
Oleg,